is Introduction to Glazes online from Alfred University. This is our hangout for December 28th, 2016. Rest in peace, Princess Leia. The gap between Christmas and New Year's. I know, that was a tough one.
Yep.
And George Michael, seriously, 2016 curse continues.
Yeah.
But we soldier on and we make great things because the future is ahead of us. So at this point, we've released the lectures up through Materials 3, which you may or may not have gotten to because Materials 3 itself went up today. Materials 3 is our discussion of alkaline earth color fluxes, as well as some various other materials that come up in our practice. And so previously we did Materials 2 being the alkali metals, more feldspars more specifically, but all the alkali metals, which is a very important discussion. And then clays, silica, and alumina. And we've also been through geology and chemistry. So, generally people will be at different points, but you could be as far as that. For those of you who didn't make it to last week's hangout, anything's on the table. So whatever you want to talk about. I don't have a specific agenda, but I am more than happy to answer questions. So if you just want me to talk about something more in depth, or, you just want me to make fun of people for doing things badly or stuff like that, because, I have a mean streak and I haven't started drinking tonight. So I'm even meaner when I've had my cocktail.
Well, I have a specific question.
Great.
The lecture, I think it was Materials 2, when you were talking about the substitutability of the potassium feldspars, and hold on, let me find the specific thing where you were comparing the chemical makeup of the different branded options, and talking about more of this and less of that, and then you sort of said, well, the good news is these are essentially similar substitutes.
Right.
So it's fine to substitute the Minspar for the Kona F4 and whatever.
Yep.
So how similar is essentially similar, or by that do you mean that they're similar enough that you can just swap one for the other, or that they're similar enough that it's not hard to tweak the chemistry when you make the substitution?
The interesting thing on the sodium feldspars specifically is that they are very, very close, and I'm just pulling up some numbers here so I can show you real quick. Now, the two potassium feldspars are slightly different. I'll show you those two as we go. But we had the three primary sodium feldspars. We had Kona F4, NC4, and then Minspar. So we had these three different sodium feldspars, and let's just look. Let me just load this up. Find the list. NC4. Oh, shoot. Wrong button. Don't want Cornwall. I want Kona F4. Okay, so let's screen share for this. And you're all going to freak out. A bad trip down memory lane, but hold on one second. Okay, so everybody see the spreadsheet? Okay, so again, I know that this is something we're going to start to get into, and we haven't really talked about the spreadsheet very much yet. But from a chemical analysis standpoint, we have discussed how the chemical analysis itself is not necessarily that beneficial because it's giving us weight percent.
Right.
And weight percent is not allowing us to see the individual molecules in relation to each other. So what we're going to get to is this whole UMF thing, this unity molecular formula thing. And so this is the UMF. And we're going to talk extensively starting actually on Friday's lecture about what this means and how it works. But just from a compare and a contrast standpoint, we can look at this. So right now I've got Minspar, and it's set at 50, but it doesn't matter. I can set it to 100. The numbers don't change. But we've got 0.85 alkali metals, which is here, okay, and 0.15 alkali earth. So add them together, and they equal 1 mole of flux. Now, your first question probably should be, hey, alkali metal, alkali earth, right? Yes, there are alkali earths in our feldspars. They're naturally occurring. We can't get rid of them, and they're perfectly fine. We then have alumina, which is at 1.09. Okay, and silica at 6.84. Now, if you remember, we've talked about that the formula for feldspar is 1 to 1 to 6. So 1 flux, 1 alumina, 6 silica. So what we have, and that's the idealized feldspar. When we have a real feldspar, we're going to get some extra. So in this case, we get 1 flux, and that flux, again, is not pure sodium as we would hope. It's got some calcium in it, and it's even got some potassium in it, but that's okay, just naturally occurring. Our alumina is 1.09, so there's some trace naturally occurring alumina that's more than our idealized molecule. And our silica is, instead of 6, is at 6.84. That's perfectly fine. So just to compare and contrast that, I'm going to jump to a different sheet here for 1 second. Sorry, I'm doing this in the dark. Come on, right click, copy, whoops, and paste, and delete. Okay, so here is NC4. Okay, so the last one we were looking at was MinSpar. Right, so this is 100% MinSpar. Now we've got 100% NC4. Shockingly enough, we have, again, basically 0.85 alkali metal, 0.15 alkali earth. It's the same exact flux distribution, minus 0.01. Okay. The alumina is slightly lower at 0.09, but the silica is basically in place at 6.89. So now, of course, then the question becomes, well, what about these minor variations? Do they make a difference from these minor variations? The fact that MinSpar is 0.09 and Kona F4 is 0.01. Does it make a difference? Not really. Okay. Now, the cool thing is that by using the UMF, we're allowed to see every single atom, essentially. Oops, cancel. And then we're allowed to put it in proportion. So those minor variations don't make a huge difference, but when we start to look at these glazes chemically, which is where we're going to start doing in the next lecture, all of these small little tweaks become evident because it's all included. Okay. So then finally, coming down to Kona F4, shockingly enough, exactly the same flux distribution, basically the same alumina level, basically the same silica level.
And so in your lecture, when you said these are exceptionally similar, you had already done this calculation using the spreadsheet, so you already knew. I mean, you can't. Yeah. I guess my question is, well, you can't tell by looking at the numbers on the percentages that are weight based. You have to enter the information into something like the spreadsheet to know, and so you just knew based on your own experience.
Well, I'm the teacher. I know everything.
Well, yeah. That aside, yeah. Okay.
Excuse me. Sorry, I have to be a little smug sometimes. No, but yes. I knew this because I'm dealing with these materials every day from a chemical perspective.
Okay, and so looking at the weight analysis and seeing that the numbers are, a few decimal points apart doesn't necessarily tell us anything.
Right, because the weight is not giving us the valuable information that we need. Let me pull up the weight analysis image here, if I can find it. There we go. So come back to my screen share and share my screen, and everybody share it. So again, here's the weight-based analysis. Whoops, wrong slide. And it doesn't tell us a lot because, yes, these are all very similar. 69.1, 68.5, 69.4. Okay, that's similar. Our alumina levels are similar. Sodium levels are similar, but okay, here's a variation in the potassium level. NC4 has a much lower potassium level, but when we look at the entire raw material in chemical proportion, all of a sudden we see that that's not relevant.
Okay. Because,
yes, there's less of this physically, but we don't care about physically, we just care about chemically. So again, then the one thing I did want to talk about here was Custer versus G200, which I don't recall if I actually did a UMF analysis of those two. But so Custer, Well, here, we'll go with the G200 EU, which is the current variation. Um, Again, I have not worked with this new one, this G200 EU. I have a sample of it, but I haven't figured out what experiments I want to do with it. But 0.82 alkali metal, primarily potassium, but some sodium. 0.18 calcium. Oh, that's not right. No, this number is not right at all. What is missing here? Something's not coming up. Oh. I'm using the wrong sheet. Oh, no. Really? It's giving me a ton of iron. That's not right. I'm going to go back to G200 HP. This analysis is questionable. There we go. So G200 HP, which is the previous American version, 0.92 to 0.08, 1.0 alumina, so literally perfect alumina, perfect fluxes, and 6.14 potassium. So actually this is incredibly close to the 1 to 1 to 6. Just a little bit of free silica, and a little bit of our flux is coming from calcium again. Whereas we can contrast this with the Custer feldspar, which is now the only remaining I should say major American potassium feldspar, where it is still 0.94. So it's actually got a little bit more potassium, okay, quite a high potassium level, lower calcium level at 0.06. The alumina level is close to 1, which is good, but the silica level is just shot to hell. The other one was 6. This is 1 or 7.58. So this is almost a mole and a half of extra silica. And if you've ever worked with Custer, especially in a clay body, you'll know that this is a problem because Custer has a ton, it's very splotchy in a clay body, in a porcelain specifically, because it's got a lot of mica, which is just silica with some iron attached to it. So it can be very dirty. So in a glaze, it's not quite as important, but in a clay body, it certainly can be. It can be an issue. Hold on one second. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Still haven't heard.
You
from
said
Tara.
it was more important. You said it was more important in a clay body than in a glaze. That difference.
Right. Well, the thing we have to remember is that in a glaze, if your glaze is well formulated, everything melts. Okay, so it doesn't matter where the silica comes from, where the alumina comes from, it all melts, and as long as we can account for it in the chemical analysis, in the chemistry of the formula, we can account for it in the formula for the glaze. In a clay body, it becomes slightly different, because in a clay body, not everything melts. Okay, in a clay body, we go back to forming mullite and glass, and they form from different parts of the clay body, and they're doing different things in the melt. So we can't necessarily eliminate something like all of that mica. It's not going to just dissolve into the glass.
Okay.
Pharaoh, you made it. You're muted, but don't worry, we love you anyway. We're happy you're here. Is there a next question? Nobody. Megan, did you have a question?
No, I didn't have any questions yet.
Oh, okay, good. I answered everyone's questions.
So I
I
have
don't think I'm quite as far as some of you guys.
That's
I'm
quite
just getting into materials 1.
That's okay. Did you make it through chemistry all right?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, I was walking through the park with my son, and we were talking about moles, and I could tell there were people walking by, and a chemist walks by and adds his 2 cents worth, and
Really?
so everyone has their own way of explaining it.
Well, I'm sorry that Fran's not here tonight. She emailed to say she's not going to make it. Fran is one of our other students who is a chemistry teacher. So she would have given me the official line on everything I'm teaching you that's wrong. But I love that you guys are talking about moles as you walk around. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, he had just gone through it in his junior year.
Well, you can let him watch the lectures because it might be more relevant than his classes, but only because you can show him results in your studio.
Right. It was all, just on paper, and he didn't have, it wasn't applied to anything.
And
I mean, other
that's
than
the problem. And I hope what I've shown you guys and what I am showing you guys, that you feel like there's relevant context. That's really where I want you to be. So,
yeah.
Excuse me, Judy. Did you have another question?
Well, this is really random. I mean, I've been.
I love random.
I
don't like cats that much.
Doing pottery for a while and feeling frustrated that I haven't understood why my glazes were doing what they were doing, or why glazes were doing what they were doing. And I've only recently started mixing glazes, but what really compelled me to take this class was I spent summers in Montana at a place that's at about 6,000 feet elevation. And I have an electric kiln it was the first kiln I bought, mostly because I didn't want to go all summer without doing clay.
Sure.
So started working with commercial pre-mixed dry glazes that I, added the water to myself. And the glazes just were doing really funky things. And I wondered,
did you say what temperature you're working at?
I was, the first summer I was working at Chacon 10 in my electric kiln. This summer I started experimenting more with cone 5-6 glazes, mostly just because there's this truism that firing an electric kiln to cone 10 is hard on it. So I thought, why don't I learn a little bit about these lower temperatures. And I had more problems at the lower temperatures. And I've watched a lot of enough of your lectures to start to get an inkling why. But my question was, would altitude affect how the glazes behave? I mean, your discussion of when the gases burn off at well below melting temperatures sort of indicated that maybe it wouldn't affect it, but there's different atmospheric pressures. The mountains we're in have a lot of limestone, and so I wondered if the dissolved mineral in the water was affecting things. So I started mixing glazes with distilled water. That didn't help, and I was in particular with glazes with rutile in them. I was getting a lot of pinholes and bubbles and whatever.
But these are from the glazes you're purchasing had rutile?
Yes.
How did you know that?
Well, actually, just because of the way they looked. That was an educated guess based on, how what glazes that I know have had rutile in them look like, and what some of these glazes look like. Right. But I don't know the chemical makeup of the glazes.
So, fascinating question. I mean, basically, if everybody is following, of how much does your location affect your glazes? I can talk about this from two different aspects. One, I went to grad school in Boulder, Colorado, after having lived on the East Coast my whole life. I started doing ceramics at basically sea level. Alfred is actually quite a high elevation. It's almost 1,500 feet for New York State. It's fairly high. And then living in Boulder, I think we're at 5,400 or 5,380 is the actual designation on Boulder. And I've, been to Anderson Ranch and Archie Bray. I don't know what the elevation is at the Bray. I mean, it's Montana. It's up there. And so would altitude have an effect on glazes? Not that I am aware of to any great degree.
Okay.
There is. Your observation is good that there are variations in barometric pressure, and the variation on barometric pressure would change the inherent temperature of certain relationships. Mm-hmm. The whole one of water boiling at different temperatures based on that. Would that affect your glazes? No, because we still have to, now from an absolute scientist standpoint, my actual answer has to be, I don't know. Mm-hmm. If, say, 6,000 feet lowers your peak temperature a certain degree, I can't say definitively. I have not studied that specifically.
Something to ponder. Yeah.
Something to ponder. My assumption would be if there is a variation, it's going to be so minor, it's not going to play a role.
Okay.
What other effects could altitude have? I'm trying to think of whether it would have an effect on glaze application. We'll talk about application in the second half because a lot of glaze defect we have actually has a lot to do with application. But I don't even think so, because you don't really get changes in viscosity. So the behavior of water based on altitude, the physical behavior of water. And like I said, that since our chemicals are not active until much higher temperatures, it's really a variable that's probably not going to have an effect. But my answer is no, but there's always a chance.
Okay.
So as to the second part of the question, the water, okay? No, again, also hokum to any degree that I have ever experienced. Classically, people always talk about in Alfred, we have exceptionally hard water. Like, I can't tell you how often I had to fill my water softener at home. Like, just crazy amounts. And you will always have people that will say, oh, I had this glaze palette that I developed when I was in school, and I left and it was completely different. And you will have people, I mean, so Alfred's a funny little place. It's a little tiny town in the middle of nowhere. It's literally a one stoplight town.
I've been there.
Oh, you have? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it was a sweet little town.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was a sweet town.
It is. It's a very sweet town. But, you know, when you live there for 18 years like I did, it loses some of the sweetness. So they would always say two things. One was that people would say that there was a lot of calcium in the water, which is sort of going with what hard water is. The others, people would say there was lithium in the water, which was what was making people insane when they lived in Alfred. I have never done or seen done a blind study on hard water versus treated water and the effect on glazes. The fact is, though, when we're looking at hard water, so soluble calcium in the water, your the parts per million are incredibly low. Okay, you know, when we're talking about our glazes, you know, we're talking about entire moles of a raw material. And let me Google really quick what sort of is the definition of hard water on a ppm scale, because I don't know that off the top of my head. But will it have an effect? I have never once seen an actual resulting effect.
That was me racking my brain trying to figure out what might be going on.
So tell me more about exactly what was.
So one particular glaze, I was just getting a lot. If I held the pot, there were all kinds of little pinholes and rough, you know, looked like little popped bubbles, little craters all over the, well, not necessarily all over the pot, along particular sides of it, both inside on the inside surface and the outside surface. But not all the glazes were doing that. So, and I did read a little, I did look in a couple books and about pinholing, and there was a specific reference to rutile glazes being more prone to doing that, and the other glazes that I was working with, it wasn't as big a problem. So I sort of, that was also part of my guess about there being rutile in the glaze.
So so pinholing, we're gonna talk about some pinholing. It's down the road. But pinholing is an interesting problem, because, not to give away the answer before we get there, but basically every reason people think glazes pinhole is wrong.
Okay.
I have a question. So I have noticed a glaze that I've applied, and there were little what appeared to be pinholes, and when it was just drying on the pot, and so that to me meant it was like the capillary action of the dry bisqueware.
I love you, Lisa. Don't let my wife hear you say that. That is an incredibly astute observation.
Cool.
But I sort of want to leave it for there because we will talk about it extensively. But the short version is you get. I mean. Actually, so Faro's here, who wasn't here last week, but Faro is friends with another student of mine named Sue, and Sue has done a lot of work with pinholing. We've been doing some research projects, and I think we're pretty close on a good definition of pinholing that is about what you're talking about application more than anything. And because you'll hear all sorts of things of, oh well, it's hard water, or it's the carbonates coming off of the glaze materials, or it's sulfates in the clay, or this or that. It's all hokum. It's all myth, without any purpose. And I'll show you exactly why. And it's a really long lecture, so I don't want to go into the whole thing now. But so going back to the original question of the variations that you're seeing. The hard thing is with it being commercial and not knowing exactly what's going on in it, the fact that you're getting worse behavior at cone 6, I'm not necessarily shocked by. Again, sort of oh, I see my wife sneaking in behind me. Do you want to come say hi, Ro? Oh, she's trying to chase a cat back into the room. The cat's escaped. That what they are doing as far as material problems and studio problems, combined with whatever they're doing for cone 6 glazes, which we don't know and they're not telling, certainly becomes a challenge. So talking about things, as I did in materials 2 about the alkali metals, where they're sourcing them from. Might they be using a lot of, might they be subbing in some soda ash or pearl ash or anything like that? We don't know, which becomes trickier, but yeah. I wish I had a better answer for that, but as we go, we will talk about some methods to be able to use those glazes better. If you still have them, if you want to continue using them, or if you're just going to say, forget it, I'm going to mix my own now.
That
taught me everything.
I'm going to mix my own. So
right.
Yeah.
Good deal. Terry, welcome. You made it.
Thank you.
For talking. I'm glad you found your way in.
Sorry to be late.
No, it's quite all right. We're happy to get everybody when they get here. Did you have any questions?
2 questions. One was about, is it Patuns?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so like,
I'm just curious about it. I mean, I hear about it as a special material in China. Is it a particular feldspar?
It's just it's a Chinese feldspar that is, I'm trying to remember. I looked up the analysis of it when the White Road came out, because honestly, we don't really use it in the States. And I'm trying to remember if I've got the analysis of it here.
I just curious, is that special, or it's just regional to China?
Well,
the
interesting thing about the way that they process their materials in Jingdezhen. Hold on one second. Is that their clays are really poor. That they have they call it a sort of feldspathic clay, and it's sort of neither feldspar nor clay. It's what it ends up being. I think the equivalent that we come across in the States is Cornwall stone, which I mean isn't even American. It's English, where it's a feldspar that actually has less alkali metals in it. And generally what they'll do in China is that they will beat this material with hammer mills. And if you ever see pictures of Jing Dejan, or you go out there, there are all these hammer mills running in everyone's studio where they're beating this China stone into a pulp, trying to make it more malleable. The fascinating thing about a lot of Chinese clays using this China stone, I think it's pronounced Batunse ware, but that's up for debate. The fascinating thing is that they for all of your teachers, whose teachers put a lot of emphasis on trimming? Raise your hands. A lot of trimming emphasis. Yeah, nothing compared to what they do in China. For a little rice bowl, yay big, paper thin walls, they actually throw that thing like inch thick walls. Because the clay throws so poorly, all they can do is throw a very generic shape. And then they trim it bone dry with essentially a razor blade down to that paper thin consistency. And so that trimming is really where they get the thinness, because the material itself is so poor. At the same end, like I said, it doesn't have actually a ton of the alkali metals that we're looking for anyway, which makes it even trickier to deal with. But the throwing of it, it's just slump city. You try to pull up the walls and it just falls right down because it just does not have enough of the clay in it. It's sort of, I talk about the kaolinization of feldspar in the clays lecture. It's sort of like half kaolinized feldspar. Though I don't know actually geologically what it is exactly. I'd have to look that up. That's a good question. What was your other question?
You mentioned the difference between V-gum and C-gum Ser and CMC.
Uh-huh.
The story about getting the two mixed. And I use V-gum Ser, but I'm aware there's a V-gum T.
Right.
You know how they do?
Yeah, V-gum Ser is V-gum T plus CMC.
Oh,
I think it's 10% CMC if I remember off the top of my head. So V-gum Ser specifically, they will pitch as for brushability and suspension properties of the glaze versus straight CMC. Straight CMC is fine. It does get very sticky. And if you let it sit around a long time, it will rot and your glazes will be nasty. But the V-gum T is the straight V-gum as it was. V-gum itself is wonderful. I am not aware of any application in a glaze where you absolutely have to use V-gum. And especially actually in a glaze, it can be tricky because the difference between bentonite and V-gum is bentonite is just silicon alumina. Depending on the grade of it, it's got some iron and titanium. Bentolite being the white, quote unquote, the white bentonite. V-gum does have both lithium and magnesium as part of the molecule, so it does have some fluxing power to it. But usually for glazes, if you want the suspension agents, V-gum Ser is where you want to go.
Does it stiffen or harden the surface as well?
A little bit, although I haven't worked that much. I mean, I've worked with CMC plenty. I haven't worked with V-gum Ser in particular, but at 10%, I'd suspect there's some minor stiffening. But I can't imagine it's that extensive.
Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. Faro, welcome. Glad to have you. Glad you made it. Did you have any questions? No? Oh, you just want to sit there muted? That's okay. That's all right. Jeff, I see you snuck in before you lay back and have a nap. Did you have any questions?
No, I'm napping. Thanks.
No. Oh.
I'm just kidding. No. So I do have a question.
Sure.
So you talk a lot. Well, first of all, you seem to have encyclopedic knowledge of the various chemicals.
Nope, I do not have a life. It's a difference.
And then on the other hand, and then we have a test coming up, and I kind of want to know how much knowledge you think is most practical for somebody like ourselves. And so I figured that's probably the level you were going to be testing us at. And so I would imagine you probably want us to know a couple of feldspars and a couple of clays. or do you want us to remember everything you said, or
Well, let me tell you.
What do you think?
Let me tell you. The exam is multiple choice, 100% multiple choice. So, you know, most likely the answer is always C. Don't quote me on that. I'm probably lying to you. You know, the unfortunately we're recording, but I'll shoot my mouth off. The exam I am required to give you by the university, I don't really care. I think that information works differently now than it ever did before. I think you have access to every piece of information at your fingertips, and even if you don't remember it, a quick Google search somewhere between Digital Fire and Glazes, you'll find out what the individual materials are. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't even remember what questions I asked you off the top of my head, but it's very general, you know, and it goes to a philosophical notion about the course as a whole of I want you to become comfortable with these subjects more than a master. Now, don't get me wrong. I want you to master these subjects, but I understand how learning works. I mean, you know, you're here for a couple of weeks and trying to take in a ton of information. Yeah, for the exam, it's just a general. I mean, honestly, like it's timed for like a few days, and you can do it with the lectures running in the background, and like you'll find all the information. Like, don't worry about the exam. Except for Kevin. Kevin has to worry about the exam because he's getting a grade.
Yeah.
So what lecture will it go through?
It goes through lecture 7.
Hey, when will you release the lectures, the written
the notes
version?
The notes come out at the end, just to make cheating not that easy. But when we're done, I will release a PDF version of all of my lecture notes.
So lecture 7, that's materials volume 2?
No, that's Friday's lecture, which has not come out yet.
Oh.
So yeah, you'll be tested on things that are right. Actually, hold on, wait. Am I shooting my mouth off? Does it even go through that? I'd have to look at the exam. I swear I'm not a bad teacher. I just don't remember what I put on it. Formulation. Quizzes. You guys want to see it early? Oh, I won't. I won't screen share with you. Kevin's a cheat. I know.
No.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I had a question.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me just look at this real quick. Asking about the origins of clays. Here's a question about alkali metal carbonates. So there is some tricky language. Identify an atom. Differences in materials. Why clays work. I mean, it's super general. No, I'm not going to ask you to memorize. Oh, wait, I lied to you. This one isn't the multiple choice exam. There are short answers on these. Identify chemical formulas. Identify materials from chemical formulas. Tell me one thing you know about a raw material. It's super easy, you guys. I swear. Don't worry about it. Unless you want to worry about it, Jeff. I mean, I can make you worry. But I was wrong. It is not multiple choice.
Yeah, I've got other things I'm worried about. So.
Okay, good.
So yeah. That's okay. So I've been thinking about the labs.
Uh-huh.
And I'm hoping that for next week I've got some samples to talk about.
Okay. Great.
I'm glad that we have those. That's good.
Yeah, and I know it's hard in this time format where we're trying to get everything done and the session's really fast, and you know I'm around after the fact. You know, you can talk with me about stuff. You all have got my contact information. But yeah, you do need to see these things in real life because I know that is the one shortcoming of doing this online class. It's great because I think historically, I think a lot of Glaze education is done too much through testing, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, but I think it's very easy to be misled by materials if you don't understand why they're working. But at the same time, I think that if you understand why they're working, you still need to see that they work. So absolutely. Yeah, the one thing is that if you do have them, please try to get them documented, as I talk about in the introduction lecture. of just a quick PowerPoint, and you can get free versions of PowerPoint, just so you can share an image, and we can have all the text and information there. It should take you like 15 minutes to put together the image once you have the tiles done.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one question, just because
Go
I
for
just got confused one second ago.
Okay.
Okay. We're all receiving a grade, right? Are we?
Yes. Oh, that's right. You're at
Okay.
VCU too. Yep. Sorry, you get a grade.
So I wanted to transfer the credits.
Yep. You
over.
get transferable credits. Yeah, I hold you to a higher standard too.
Sure, because I just got scared.
No, I forgot. I forgot that you are too. I'm in a tricky place. 70% of my students are non-traditional learners, so lifelong learners or professors at other institutions, but people that are just coming for the information. So I will admit to you guys, to Kevin and Megan, who are here as undergraduates from other schools, that yes, I do hold you guys to a higher standard. Because the rest of the people want to just come and learn and don't want to take the test. So, I try to make it not too painful.
Okay.
Any other questions? So I know that like these first 6 lectures are a lot of vegetables. But starting with Friday's lecture, which again I was wrong, is not on the exam, so it is only through lecture 6. Sorry, I have 3 courses going right now, so I forget sometimes. After that, lecture 7 is where like things get awesome. Not that things aren't awesome already, like. Believe me, I know it's awesome. Everybody loves to talk about valences. Like, as Lisa said, you walk through the park and you talk about moles. And people are like, were you talking about moles? Because I want to talk about some moles right now. Like, that just happens every day. And unfortunately, they're talking about the star-nosed little buggers. But on Friday is where we're going to dive into what I would call the awesomeness of amazing. Because we're going to talk about how glazes are really working. We're going to talk about how temperature really works, because it's not the way that you've been thinking about it your whole life, your whole ceramic life, that we don't actually necessarily perceive temperature in a very clear way when we just say cone 10 or just say cone 6 or any of those types of things, because temperature is not temperature. Temperature is a relationship between heat and chemistry. And that's an incredibly important concept, because our ability to melt silica defines our ability to make ceramics. And that may sound like something really stupid or not interesting, but that's incredibly important concept. If we can't melt silica, we can't make glazes. So we have to think about how silica reacts to heat, and how our kilns are functioning, because as Judy was saying, we have certain kilns and you can only push some kilns so far. Well, what's the relationship between kilns and heat? And then what is on the opposite end, the relationship between glass and heat and silica and heat and all of these types of things, because it's not just, we just have to hit this temperature. There's so much more to it than just hitting this temperature, right? That it is a unified chemical reaction that we're aiming to, and it's a huge deal. And I'm probably making it sound even more boring than you already thought it sounded, but it's awesome. Like lecture 7 and lectures 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13's a piece of garbage. No, I'm just kidding. 13's color. Color's fun, but I like the why are we making glasses? Like, that to me is so cool. So we're gonna talk about that starting on Friday, and like, to me, that is the bee's pajamas. Like, that is the coolest. Kevin's touching his camera. Don't touch your camera.
Sorry.
Keep your hands to yourself. Do we have any more questions? I'm more than happy to hang out and talk.
I have a question about like durability and food safety, but I can save it till like when we get to that.
That is lecture 9. So if
I
you
can hang on to it.
well, you can ask it. The answer might be we'll get there, but go ahead and ask.
How do you feel about like the durability of bare clay, like
Oh,
in terms of making functional wear?
well, one of my former students, Josh Smith, and where is Josh right now? I think he's in Saratoga, and he's not making this work anymore. But when he was a student, he did some really fun stuff. He came from an auto body family, and so he had all these polishing wheels, and really fine grit polishing. And what he would do is he would take stoneware and make a pot out of it, and then polish it to an absolute glassy finish, and they were gorgeous. I mean, just like take the most amazing like Native American burnish that you've ever seen times a million. And so why do we use glazes, I guess, is the bigger question. I mean, that's sort of, do we need glazes? The short answer is no, you don't need them. But, of course, there's a million conditions. One, glazes are what we'll call a compressive coating, which we'll talk about more when we get into glaze flaws. But the compressive coating actually strengthens the clay body. So, excuse me. So by adding a layer of glaze on top of your clay, it is actually making it stronger. Okay?
It's like squeezing the clay?
It is
compressing
exactly.
it?
It's squeezing the clay. And that squeezing will make the whole system much stronger. The second thing is that we are protecting ourselves against porosity. So we talk a lot about cone 10, and we are gonna talk about other temperatures, but cone 10 is based on this notion of vitrification. You're turning your clay body into a glass and mullite, right? That process should have very low porosity, but it will always have some porosity. A vitrified clay body is considered to have less than 0.5% absorption. Okay, less than 0.5% absorption. So you take your pot, you weigh it when it's dry, you boil it in water, and then you weigh it again. It should only weigh less than 0.5% more than it did before, because there are no pores to soak up the water. And even actually, that 0.5% is lying to you. That's just water that sticks to the surface when you run your measurement. Here's the catch. So going with my whole cone 6 is a crazy conspiracy thing. I'm not crazy if the people that are out to get me are out to get me, because what the clay companies have done is that they have redefined vitrified. For cone 6, a clay company will tell you vitrified is less than 3% absorption. So 6 times more absorption than is actually acceptable. And to me, to be vulgar about it, that's bullshit. But we'll get into that later. So you are protecting against unvitrified wear, because water gets into your clay. There's the classic of, it can grow bacteria. I'm actually not that concerned about growing bacteria, but water in your clay can swell and expand and can cause glaze damage, can cause your clay body to fall apart. Having 3% absorption has a massive number of problems with it that I can't really talk about here because it'll take forever. But it's a problem, and it's not just us. I had a student last year who was from England, and I said to her, I said, go to your clay company and ask what the absorption on your cone 6 clay is. 3%. Even in England, they're pushing the same line, and it's not really, it's not cool by me, but nobody's asking me. So back to, sorry, I tend to go on tangents sometimes, you guys. I'm sorry. Does anybody have any place to be? No? Anybody's children on fire? Mine probably are, but okay. Mom's watching them. So can you make a clay body without glaze? The next question then becomes usability. Okay. Glaze is a 100% vitrified surface. A well-fired glaze, you're not going to get any absorption to speak of. So you're not going to get any porosity. You're not going to get absorption of bacteria or food. But you're also going to have a better eating surface, because even the nicest porcelain has what we call surface roughness to it. And glazes overcome this problem because glazes are self-leveling. So even though it's made up of all of these different rocks, the raw materials are still just rocks. When they melt and form a glass, the glass levels out the high spots and the low spots, so it's perfectly smooth. So from a fork on plate situation, those crevices of an unglazed ware, it's going to scrape and it's going to bump and it's going to tear the knife apart. We see this all the time in clay glazes that are metal marked. Has anyone here ever seen metal marking before?
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about
right.
it. Right. We'll talk about it in the glaze flaws section. But if you haven't, I'm on my laptop, so I don't have all my files with me, so I can't pull up the metal marking picture. But it's literally, it looks like the surface of a plate. You usually see it on a plate. It looks like it's been crosshatched, like a drawing. Okay, just back and forth. And what that is a knife being dragged back and forth across that plate surface. And the glaze that it's on is not perfectly smooth. And so on all of those peaks, as the knife goes across that plate, those peaks are literally tearing shards of metal off of the plate. Now, shard is the wrong word. They're microscopic deposits, but we see them visually and they become physically part of the glaze. And you'll see it on high quality dinnerware very commonly. And that's because actually it's generally the fault of Zircopax, which is our opacifier. Zircopax we add to our glazes to make our glazes appear white. But Zircopax does not actually melt in the glaze. And so you get these peaks and valleys in a perfectly smooth glaze surface. And so when the knife goes across it, it's leaving these metal deposits. So if you have an unglazed surface, it's that times 100. In a glaze, it's very minor, but in a clay body, it's going to be even more extreme if it's unglazed.
What about staining?
Absolutely. Staining is a concern. Hi, John. Everybody say hi to John. He came for his glasses. Hey. John, everybody says hi.
Hi, John.
That's Frunkle John, the friendly uncle. Staining, going back to this notion of porosity. Okay, if you're working on a surface that has open pores, that staining material can get into those pores and leave a permanent deposit. And so, yes, absolutely, you can do that. And in fact, the common way to see that happen is, do I have... Oh, haha, you guys see it all the... No, that's not the right slide. Damn it. Sorry, now I'm trying to think where my slides this picture is of my thousands of slides. Whenever you've seen crazes that are emphasized decoratively, generally what you do is you just take a glaze piece and you rub India ink on it. And the India ink will semi-permanently embed itself into the craze marks. Okay? And it'll stay. So very much the same with the pores. It will just embed itself in. And it's not that it's permanent. It's very much not permanent, but it becomes so hard to wash it out that it's essentially permanent. So yeah, the same thing with the raw clay. But so back to the original question. Can you serve food on a raw clay surface? Yes, because if you assume the clay is vitrified and you try to keep the eating surface as smooth as possible, is it acceptable? Yes, it's acceptable. It's not ideal. It will hold water, okay? It will, for the most part, resist bacteria, for the most part. assuming it's fully vitrified, so under 1/2 of 1%. And you can relatively clean it. You know, soap and some sort of a scouring cleanser surface will probably make it clean. Hot water. Well, I mean, you all know the thing of that soap doesn't actually clean, right? Soap just breaks up oils and allows them to be flushed away. It's the hot water that does the cleaning. So, yes. Why? Did you have a project, or are you just asking questions?
Just asking.
Okay, good question.
I have a question
Go for it.
about, you mentioned density of clay, and you talked about it in reference to breakage. And I think, like, you weren't using density like typically like the physicists would do density. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the glaze. Like, I don't know, you said something about, I can't remember now.
Well, we don't use density to measure glazes per se.
Okay.
There are some conditions, like when we're talking about glazes in suspension, you'll measure it with specific gravity, which is a variation on density. And just to back up for everybody, you know, while we go into a density conversation that you didn't know you wanted to have, and after we're done, you still wouldn't have wanted to have it. Density is the basic study of how much material you can fit in a certain space. Okay, so it's generally referenced by a cubic centimeter. So you have a centimeter, which, and now that looks huge, but on my nose, so that's about a centimeter. And you have it cubic, so in 3 dimensions. So how much material can you fit into a cubic centimeter? More specifically, grams per centimeter cubed. So how many grams does a cubic centimeter weigh? In clays, density becomes a very relevant measurement because a well-fired clay will have a very specific density. Okay. Again, I don't want to go too far into the numbers because I'll put everybody to sleep. But it is generally a porcelain, which is the standard for clay bodies, will be about 2.4 grams per centimeter cubed. So 2.4 grams per 1 cubic centimeter. For reference, water minus the glass, just the water itself, is 1 gram per centimeter cubed. So 2.4 times more dense than water. Unfired clay is roughly 1.6 grams per centimeter cubed. So when you fire it, our clay becomes more dense. You go from 1.6 to 2.4. Okay? And that's because you're making glass and you're making mullite and you're getting rid of pores. And that's one of the reasons why we have shrinkage. Okay? We have 2 major causes of shrinkage in our clays. One is in drying, the particles get physically closer together because the water goes away. And then the second is the conversion of clay and mullite take up less space. So the materials just literally become more dense. So that's the relevance of density in clays. In glazes, yeah, it's not really a relevant figure. So did you have a?
Yeah, maybe I understood it. Maybe it was just a tangent with regard to the clays then that I remember hearing that.
Do I do tangents? No, that wasn't me.
No, it was somebody else.
Yeah,
so, so a minute ago, though, you were saying that. Well, no. Let me ask this. So, does the glazing affect the breakage or the structural integrity of a piece?
Great question. Yes, that goes back to the notion of the compressive coating. By placing our clay in compression, it makes it inherently stronger. So just to put this in reference, back when I was working in research, we had a project that was brought to us by a body armor manufacturer. And they had a ceramic body armor. It wasn't clay-based. I can't talk about it or the Department of Defense will come and kill you. But there was a ceramic body armor, and they needed to make it stronger. So they came to us and asked us to glaze it, under the notion that putting a glaze on it will put the body armor under compression, which will make it stronger. So yes, it does make pieces stronger. That said, here's the big exception. And we'll talk about this down the road in another lecture. If it's crazed, it's actually much weaker. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. But, you know, everybody gets concerned, excuse me, with crazing as far as, oh, I'm growing bacteria or some such thing. Like I said, I don't really care about that. That's not a concern to me. Where crazing is a problem is that it is going to make your pots severely weakened. Meaning, you know, you accidentally hit it against the sink, or you clink 2 mugs together and crack city population you without a mug.
So would a clay-based glaze like a Shino be more compressive than another?
This is a fascinating question. No. I like your thinking a lot. Very, very good thinking. No, it wouldn't, because going back to the notion of studio versus kiln. So we're going to talk about Shinos in lecture 11, I think. But so Shinos, if you're not familiar with them, are glazes that are exceptionally high clay content. They also are a glaze that has essentially no alkaline earth in them. They're pure alkali metal and clay. So they're pretty much generally feldspar and clay. And Shinos, if you worked with them, tend to be very thick. And they're thick because they have so much clay content. And we sort of talked about how we're in this very narrow area. We need at least 5% clay to keep a glaze suspended. Okay, to keep all the other materials floating. But we can't really have more than 25% clay content without the glaze physically, the physical raw glaze, becoming very, very thick because of those Newtonian principles of clay particles, the way they float and bounce and keep the whole glaze in suspension. So when you have something like a Shino, it's got a ton of clay in it. But the problem is, because it's in suspension, it doesn't compress very well. And so the compressive coating is not particularly effective. But I love your thinking, Lisa. Like, I see exactly where you're going in that logic, but unfortunately it just doesn't work that way. The other question becomes about the strength of the glass itself. And as we will talk about starting next week, we're going to talk about the role of the alkali metals and the alkali earths in our glazes, which I keep talking around it, but I haven't really talked about why and what and how. But when we get into them, we're going to find that excessive amounts of alkali metal, so our lithium, sodium, potassium, are really problematic for our glazes. Okay, but we're going to get into that next week. But yeah, yeah, I'll leave that there. If you have a follow-up question before I go off on another tangent.
I have a question about the books.
Okay.
So, you went through that book list, which was really good to explain your take on those texts. That was good.
Right.
So I already had like 2 of them. So I was kind of looking through them, and then there's always the qualifications, like there's some stuff that's wrong in them.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you there's not like an errata published online of each textbook that I know of. And then you said that there's like questionable information on the internet, and I learned a lot from Digital Fire, but and Wikipedia and those kind of things. I just don't know I don't know like what to believe, I guess, and how to determine, you know, what if someone is speaking accurately about a subject, because I don't really have a pathway between the knowledge that I see, or I should say the teaching that I see, and the reference in some
Right.
journal. So what do you do? What do you do?
Can I hold that question off for 1 second?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions about class content for this moment? Oh, I got Eli. Eli, you want to come say hi? No, you're gonna be shy. He's gonna be shy. Okay, you don't have to be on camera. Good night. I love you. Huh? It stinks. Yes, the cats are in here. I'm sorry. So, any other questions on class content? Don't anybody go anywhere. You're more than welcome to hang out, but I'm gonna stop the recording. Because are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to cut off the recording here. So if you're a member of the class, you've seen up through here, and you're not going to miss anything after I shut off. Feel free to post questions on the discussion board or any relevant place so we can continue the discussion. We'll be back next week with our talks on the unity molecular formula and glaze calculation. Okay, bye. I'll talk to you later. Okay, don't go anywhere, you guys.